let's dive straight into the discussion. The first topic that we've got to talk through is the technical approaches for MEP design, or to MEP design in the UAE compared to Europe. So if I can hand over to you guys to have a bit of a discussion.
Who's going to tee it off then? You want me to go first then? Go then.
Go on then.
Yeah. I was going to say, I remember when I first started getting involved in projects overseas and the Afghanistan stuff and Qatar and things like that, and I was surprised at some of the old practices that were used at that time across the region in terms of design and things like that. I mean, MEP design's MEP design. The basic physics and things is always the same. But some of the local practices and the contracts and the way that things are set up here seem a bit backwards, especially if you've maybe come from the UK or Europe and you've been used to dealing with more progressive contracts and things like that. I mean, sometimes you look at things here and you always think, am I just vanished back into the 1980s, and it just gives you a bit of a surprise. But I find that, in the last 8 years being here, things have moved on at a great pace, as they do tend to do in the Middle East. And, they've gone from maybe being, behind in some of these things to, in some instances, especially in some of the MEP design and some of the more smart building technologies, to being ahead of where places are and things are in the UK. So there's lots of exciting challenges that I find in the Middle East, and there's always someone wanting to do something different. That's maybe how I'll leave that one. There's always someone wanting to do something different and challenge it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, so go after you, mate.
I was going to say, yeah, I agree with that, Jim. I think one of the big differences between Middle East and the UK is obviously it's the projects, it's the client expectations, it's the sort of the timelines that we're expected to meet in this region. They've become the norm now. They're very much shorter and more aggressive than the UK. As a result of that, it sort of drives a different design strategy. So most of the big players in the Middle East now would have, let's call it a production office somewhere in Philippines, India, Romania, or somewhere in Europe, whereby that would be the engine room. So the timelines are so aggressive. Clients like to change their minds so often that without that big engine room to adapt and make these changes and react to these different client requirements, we just wouldn't be able to get through the projects. That's probably the biggest difference I can sort of just straight off the bat say between the UK and the Middle East. Go on, Nick.
I was going to say, well, two things. To go back to Jim's original point, I completely agree with that. But about I think sometimes, particularly when I first started, sort of in the 2008-10s, there was quite a lot of resistance to new ideas. There was very much an attitude of, well, this is what I've done on previous projects. And so there was a real resistance to doing anything different. But when a new idea catches, it catches extremely fast, and then it's everywhere. And definitely, I think in the last 3 or 4 years, people are much, much more open to innovative ideas, to energy saving, to looking at different approaches to engineering solutions, and particularly with the adoption of BIM and digitalization. I mean, when I joined WME 5 years ago, when we were doing BIM, what was happening was the designs were being done in schematic design in CAD, because everyone said, well, we don't get architectural models in BIM. We can't do BIM before DD. And so people were then taking what they'd done at SD and redrafting the whole thing in BIM at the start of DD. And that was 4 or 5 years ago. Now we're doing BIM models at concept, digital calculations, everything done from the Revit model from day one. And that change has happened extremely quickly. And now when we look at what's happening, particularly with some of these giga projects in Saudi, anyone who's working with the major PIF developers, the BIM requirements are incredibly onerous, and they're challenging for everybody to try and reevaluate how you work, how you're delivering your projects, to make sure that you're meeting these expectations. And as I say, when things change here, they change really fast. And the other thing I'd say, again, obviously myself and Scott have worked together for a number of years, and he's absolutely right. The programs are super challenging. It forces you to you have to make good decisions, but you have to make good decisions quick. You do not have the luxury of time, particularly in the concept phase, to be doing months of studies of options. It does not happen. You know, you could be doing a project of several 100,000 square meters and you're expected to get out a concept with a coordinated plan and strategies in 6 weeks. That's not especially uncommon. And it requires you to have a good idea of what will work and really focus very quickly on the right solutions for projects. But for me personally, coming from the UK, the big difference that I saw straight away and that continues to blow me away is the scale. You know, I'll never forget the last job I did I'm a mechanical engineer by background, in the UK for Max Fordham's was it was a school project, and I think we had something like 200 kilowatts worth of chillers on it. It was all naturally ventilated. The first job I designed at WSP was a 10 megawatt chiller plant. I went from 200 to 10 megawatt in the space of about 4 months. And, you know, myself and Scott worked on a project. I think Jumeirah Open Beach was 35 megawatt chiller plant, something of that order.
Yeah, 35 megawatts, yeah.
You know, and, you know, working on 300,000 square meter schemes, you know, all of this kind of stuff. The scale is just, it's incredible, and it's incomparable to anything I saw during my time in the UK.
And those are mid-sized projects.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't even mega projects. They were just jobs. When you're bidding a job and it's you know, 2 50-story towers and it's 120,000 square meters, and you go, no, this one will be easy. You know, that's when you realise that it's just a different scale.
And that was something, Nick, that when I went my 2-year holiday, when I went back to the UK and worked in the UK for 2 years, so I went back in 2017 to the UK and came back here in 2019. So I was back for 2 years. The first year of that was just a novelty, and the second year was I was persuading my wife to come back out here. But to notice the difference, so I was in a healthcare team back in the UK. I was at ACOM, as I say, leading Cambridge office, and it was healthcare. And the difference in the programs and the speed of things in the UK to here was just polarized. You could see it so clearly. You know, you could work in the UK for, I'll not say hospital, they're very complicated, but you wouldn't even get out of design in 12, 18 months, you know, whereas here you're knocking those things out. Nick and I worked on a hospital in KSA, mega hospital, I think it's 1,200 beds, something like 1,700 beds.
Yeah, 500,000 square meters.
Yeah,
1.5 kilometers end to end, that building was.
And I think the design, I think that was within, I think it was about 6 to 9 months, I think we designed that one, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things, I think Nick touched upon it, was just, you know, program. You know, some of the programs here are just, you know, very aggressive, you know, and we are starting to look at, you know, how we manage that. You know, are we looking at digitalization, you know, through automation, you know, with BIM? You know, one thing that I've seen, you know, getting adopted more and more in the Middle East now is kind of computational design, you know, with parametric tools. You know, we're doing kind of projects quicker, you know, not through, you know, more people or, you know, bigger project teams, but for using software, you know, optioneering, you know, trying to reduce, you know, drive energy down or try and reduce the number of materials, you know. So I think that is something that is helping kind of meet these, you know, challenging programs that, you know, are definitely associated with, you know, the legacy divide, but also the new giga projects that are coming from, you know, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it's almost born out of necessity, isn't it? You have no choice. You have to be, you know, if you've got any chance, you have to work smarter. And to say there's so many things that you can do now with digitalization that can really, really speed up the back end design. And, you know, if you can speed up the back end design, that gives you time at the front end to actually make sure you're making the right decisions first. And I think that's kind of key for, you know, delivering all of these kind of mega projects that are starting to come through.
It's those right decisions. It's your engineering gut feeling gets used an awful lot in this region. Yeah. You know, when you first start looking at something, you go, actually, the gut feel is this is how it's going to go, and it starts shaping you down that route, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you get your spidey senses start tingling. And
Exactly.
I mean, it's so the company I work for, Max Boredom's, their approach was always, every problem starts with the extent of the universe, and then you focus in on the final solution. And whilst that is a wonderful way to work, in the Middle East, very, very rarely do you have that luxury. And you have to go through the right process. You have to look at the viable solutions and get down to a list of, okay, there's 3 or 4 things here. I know we can make these work. Now let's look at these and kind of pick the right solution. But that process, you have to go really, really quickly with it. You don't have the luxury to do anything else.
Yeah.
And just quickly, if you don't mind, guys, just referring back to the digitisation piece, there's a few candidates that I've spoken to over the last probably 6 to 12 months, I'd say, that haven't necessarily been familiar with it, or the actual process itself. Is there any of the softwares and stuff that you guys could recommend that people could look into to research and find out more information?
Yeah, I think, James, on kind of computational and parametrics, there's a big push, for Rhino, and then you've got Grasshopper, you've got all the insects, you've got, Ladybug, there's all these different softwares now. And, when I started industry, IES was just coming out, and now obviously you've got all these parametric kind of front end tools that are really kind of helping us drive innovation, creativity. But, they give us interface to kind of plug into, other tools that help us kind of really develop our designs at the front end. So obviously you can do much more to kind of make decisions quicker, like Nick's saying, that can really kind of, help push the project forward. So I think, if I was, probably given a recommendation, to someone, a graduate or an intermediate engineer, was, really make sure that you're getting to know kind of, you become software savvy, you're looking at parametric, computational, and you know where their interfaces are to kind of really help, drive efficiency, to push projects forward.
100% agree with that, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, I would as well. And I'd also add to that, if you're at a more senior level in your career, learn to use Revit. Like, there's no question, within WME, myself, all of our technical directors, associate directors, we got our BIM team to do like a 6-week program, a couple of hours a week to learn. You can't run a factory if you don't know how the machines work. And Revit is so powerful, and there's so much other stuff that could be done around Revit, with Dynamo scripting. And we've recently brought a Revit API programmer on board to actually start working within Revit to develop specific tools. BIM and Revit will be the design tool. Everything will go through the single source of truth, which will be the Revit model. And I think that we're seeing such a rapid increase in the pace of that. I really think everybody, almost at any level of your career, has to have a very, very good understanding of it, because otherwise you're going to get left behind in the next few years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, Jim.
No, I was just about to say, I mean, any engineer or anyone that's in the MEP industry that can't work in a 3D environment now is going to be looking for something to do in about 5 years' time. Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much for those insights, and yeah, some good takeaways for those that are on the webinar to go and do some research if you're not familiar with those, the terminology and the software.